Hello, and welcome back to my TearRing Saga Champions of Utena low turn count playthrough. In this video, we're going to be going over Chapter 8. Now that we've finally finished up our objectives in the Kingdom of Welt, we're finally ready to head off. And so we're going to go north in search of Holmes, because that's where he was last we knew. As we head north, we're going to have several cutscenes that I'm going to just skip over. And these cutscenes are designed to set up the story for this chapter. The short version is that one of Holmes's crew has discovered a summon staff lying around in the fortress on Azura Island, and has been walking around waving the staff around for the last few days. That's led to an infestation of monsters all over the island, which is the primary enemy that we're going to be facing on this map. This is the first map in the game where we see monster enemies, though it's quite definitely not going to be the last. The monsters that have been summoned to fight us on this map are two types called Revenants and Entombed. Revenants are the more basic looking ones that look more directly like zombies, and they're pretty weak with low defenses, low attack. They're overall not much of a threat. The golden monsters are the Entombed, and they're actually even weaker in terms of stats than the Revenants, but when we kill them, they actually give out an enormous amount of experience. So we're going to be using this map as a bit of an experience grinding fest, thanks to those guys being here. Once we're on the map, Martel is going to use a Master Potion as the first thing she does, which will increase her Mastery by 3, which is enough to allow her to use Levin Swords. I mentioned when I first discussed Martel that her strength is not particularly reliable, and on this map we're going to be picking up the first Levin Sword of the game, which is going to give her a strong 2-range magical attack. Because her magic is actually surprisingly decent, given that her class is generally thought of as being focused on physical weapon types. Alongside Martel, the units we want to focus levels into are Vega and Tom, and we're going to put a little bit of effort into Marouge as well. So basically, business as usual here. Okay, so we've picked up 3 new units on this map. The 2 that we're looking at right now are Zeno and Junie, but I'll get to them. I want to talk about the 3rd for a moment here. This unit is Katri, and she is like Ente. She is a shaman, so she is an important unit who we have to keep alive in order to avoid a game over. So I'm going to move her out of range of the Revenants here. Katri is essentially Holmes's equivalent of Ente. She's going to be forcibly deployed on all of Holmes's maps, and she'll be making use of her staff utility in order to support him as best she can. Katri has a few other notable quirks to her. In particular, she has the summon skill, which allows her to use Wait, hang on, what's happened to Katri? Where did she go? Well, oh, that's annoying. I guess we won't be using her right now. So let's move on. We're going to be feeding Tom some experience points here. He gets a nice entombed kill and a level. And wait. What's that? Is that a dragon? Jesus Christ. Okay, we're going to stay well away from that. I do not want to get caught up in the dragon. Okay, so let's move on here. The objective of this map is for Runan to seize again. And as usual, we're going to have Raffin clear the way for him. The rest of the map is just tidying up the enemies to make sure that Runan is unobstructed as he heads across the terrain-filled map. And also to make sure that that dragon is distracted. So, yeah, we don't want that thing getting anywhere near where Runan is. Okay, One part of my deployment that's a little bit odd is the fact that I have 3 healers on the field. This is pretty excessive, and I probably would have done better to deploy Zeeg, or maybe even Roger, in place of Plum, to get some experience on them. It's especially egregious because they end up with only Raquel for defense, and obviously she is unable to kill any enemies that aren't monsters. That means that if something goes spectacularly wrong, we only have Mel to rely on here, and her combat, as mentioned, is terrible. Now, I'm a little bit worried here, because I have put Martel awfully close to that dragon, and it looks like it's about to start moving. Ah, but there we go, it's attacking the enemies. I guess the dragon is on our side, so that's one less thing to worry about in this map. With that concern laid to rest, I guess it's time for us to talk about the other units. So the first of these units is Zeno. Zeno is a mercenary, and that means he uses swords. Eventually he'll promote into a hero if you level him up. And he also starts out with the Seafarer skill, which is useful on Holmes' route because Holmes has quite a few sea maps later on in the game. The trouble with Zeno is his base stats. He has relatively acceptable combat parameters, but we have Vega, and Vega just outclasses him in every way, and that's before taking into account the levels that Vega has already picked up over his longer availability. Heroes also don't get axes in this game, which means that Zeno is quite literally just inferior Vega, with nothing like the Shram sword to set him apart or give him a special niche. So we're not going to be using Zeno very much at all in this run. The other unit that is here is Junie, and Junie is really important. Junie's combat stats are absolutely, totally awful apart from her high speed. And that's because she is a thief, and she's not really intended to be used as a combat unit at all. Instead, she's meant to be used as a utility unit, and that is backed up by the 2 skills that she starts out with. Firstly, there is the Thief class skill, Lock Touch. Lock Touch allows a thief to open doors without using a door key, and it also allows them to open chests, making them the only units in the game that can perform this duty. For some reason, it doesn't have any effect on bridges though, so you'll still need bridge keys for those. You can see that there are quite a few treasure chests all over this map, and Junie is our one way of getting the valuable items that are hiding within those. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the movement to reach all of the chests on this map before Runan Caesars, but we're going to pick up 4 of them still, which is a solid initial contribution for Junie to make to our run. And she's going to be deployed quite a lot in maps further down the line because there are lots of treasure chests all along Holmes' route. Junie's other base skill is Steal, which is not a Thief's class skill in this game. Steal in this game is actually a combat proc. It has a skill plus speed % chance of activating, and when it does, it steals 1 item from the unit being stolen from. Star weapons cannot be stolen by this effect, however. The thing about this skill in general is that I often don't want it to activate, because if you steal a weapon from an enemy, then that means they're not being weighed down anymore, and that can make them very difficult to kill. In positioning-based maps in particular, this effect can make the map unwinnable in the lowest possible turn count, so it's something I want to avoid most of the time. Basically, the overall theme of Junie is that she's not someone you want to be putting into combat, except as a last resort. One more thing related to the Steal skill that I want to talk about is the Thief's Dagger, which is a sword that gives the user effectively a 100% steal proc. There are enemies later on in the game who use these against you, and they are a real pain to deal with, because they end up stealing your weapons away. If you really need to engage such an enemy in combat, a good strategy is to have a unit who only has star weapons and items in their inventory to prevent anything from being stolen from you. Thankfully, I don't have to face any such enemies during this run, which is why I'm mentioning it now instead of when they show up. If you level up Junie a ridiculous amount, she does learn several other skills that seem to want her to turn into a combat unit, but we're not going to get anywhere near those levels. Now let's talk about the reinforcements that arrived last enemy phase, and are now providing Vega with ample experience points. The rogue enemies among these reinforcements are programmed to head straight for the treasure chests, so in a more casual run, beating them to the treasure chests or killing them on the way is an important part of the challenge of this map, especially since the reinforcements appear multiple times all the way down the coast of this map as it goes on. Obviously though, they're not going to get anywhere near the treasure chests that I'm going to be able to get, because we're just going way too fast for them. The reason that these pirates are here is because Holmes kicked out a pirate chieftain from this fortress when he took it for himself. And now that pirate guy is back to get some revenge. Obviously, we are going to deny him that revenge as much as possible, and we're going to see most of his band taken down before the end of this map. While Martel continues to put kills on the Iron Lance, Runan is actually about to pull out the Iron Sword that I've been neglecting so far, and start putting kills on that. He needs to wend his way up the one tile wide path towards the gate, and he's going to take any opportunity that he can get in siege maps to gain experience points. The enemies clogging this narrow path make life a little bit difficult for me, but Runan actually has a couple of tiles of leeway on this map, so we'll work it out. Junie is now picking up the wing potion from a treasure chest, and that's a very important item for later on. Speed is, as usual in Fire Emblem, a really, really powerful stat, and in fact, speed benchmarks are among the very few stat benchmarks that I gave any consideration to when planning this run out. So by picking up the wing potion, Junie is in a way already saving us turns later on down the line. I would like to now draw your attention back to the one tile wide pathway up towards the siege point, because narrow choke points are a common trend in movement-based maps in this game. A really large number of revenants started out on that path, and we need to remove them all as soon as possible so that Runan is unobstructed. As you can imagine, if you're playing a movement-based map with a tight feature like this, and you fail to remove an enemy from the choke point in time, then your lord is going to get stuck, and you're going to have to reset if you're going for a low turn count. So maps like this were fairly frustrating throughout this run. I'd like to take a moment here to talk about the weapons that the Revenants and Entombed are using. In this game, monster weapons are not a separate weapon type like they are in Gaiden and Echoes. Instead, weapons made out of the body parts of a monster are all treated as axes, which I find quite amusing. Such weapons have a special black star in front of their name so that they can't be stolen or anything. With that out of the way, the dragon seems to have disappeared, and we have Katri back, so let's talk about her properly. As mentioned, she's a shaman and an important character who uses staves, but she has some special properties to her. The first of these is that she's the first unit in the game to have the summon skill at base. This skill allows her to use a series of staves that summon monsters to fight alongside you, as long as she has the requisite mastery to use them. The staff that she has at the moment is a zombie staff, which summons revenants and entombed, and there are similar staves that summon things like gargoyles and harpies and bone walkers later on. The monsters that Katri summons using her staff are always green units, so they fight alongside you, but enemies can use these staves too, and when they do, the monsters that they summon are just red units, which try and kill you. The other thing about Katri is the elephant in the room, and that's the whole dragon transformation thing. In Katri's inventory is an infinite use item called the Ring of Salia, and using this item allows her to transform into the fire dragon Neuron, who is one of the 4 guardian dragons of the continent in the story. This transformation is not permanent. It lasts between 3 to 7 turns. I'm not sure of the exact mechanics actually, but in my experience it's always been within those numbers of turns. At the end of her transformation time, she will transform back into her weak shaman self at the start of an enemy phase, so it's pretty important that you don't lose track of where she is and how long she's been transformed. The Guardian Dragons are extremely powerful with fairly high stats and a couple of other advantages up their sleeves. Katri is the only one of the shamans who can actually regularly use her transformation, and it's an extremely useful tool while we have it. The 4 dragons share certain properties, including their high stats, and they also all have the Frontiersman skill, giving them a little bonus on frontier maps. They all wield breath weapons exclusively while they're transformed, and there are 2 different types of breath. Firstly, there's the smaller breath weapon, which has 1 might and targets a single enemy, and the dragons also have a weapon called Fierce Breath, which targets an area and has 20 might, so that's very strong. I'm going to take a break from talking about dragons here to point out that Mel is having some combat, and she's doing very little damage. In a moment we'll see that she's only doing 1 damage, so it's lucky that we already had Raquel to weaken that guy, and also that Mel got a critical hit. This is the only combat Mel sees in the game, so enjoy it while it's there. Anyway, back to the breath weapons. Fierce Breath's area of effect is a 3x3 square centered on the point that you target. And because of its high might, it's extremely useful for clearing out large groups of enemies. Both of the breath attacks also completely ignore the target's protection and resilience, which is why they're so effective. They attack HP directly. All of this ends up making Katri a really good combat unit, despite the fact that she seems to be just a staff user. The last thing that the dragons all share is a special shield called Dragon Skin. This shield has several special properties, the main one of which is that it grants plus 40 to protection and resilience. This means that the dragons are extremely durable. In fact, there are no enemies in the entire game that have sufficient attack to deal damage to Katri while she is transformed into Neuron. The other properties of Dragon Skin are all designed to make sure that getting enough attack to bypass it is as hard as possible. Firstly, it negates effective damage against the user, which means that even if you have a weapon that would be effective against dragons, it's not going to get the triple might from effective damage against the Guardian Dragons. Its second property is that it negates critical hits against the dragons, which prevents you from using critical hits attack doubling properties to break through. And finally, it also negates most defense negation effects in the game. There are skills and weapons throughout the game that completely negate an opponent's defensive stats, which would theoretically allow you to hurt the Guardian Dragons just fine if Dragon Skin didn't negate it. There's a little quirk here in that Dragon Breath is not fully affected by this. It does in fact negate the defense of enemy Guardian Dragons, but only their raw defensive stat. It does not negate the protection bonus granted by Dragon Skin. And you can see this in the later map where we have to fight one of the Guardian Dragons and Catry is available to us. When you target the enemy dragon with Catry's small breath, it shows the defense of both of the dragons as being 40. Alright, we're heading into the final stages of this map. Junie is about to pick up the Levin Sword. The two chests that we weren't able to get contain a Night Crest in the lower right and a Thunder Shield in the upper left. The Thunder Shield is a rare item that grants plus 12 resilience against enemies using Thunder Tomes. There are versions of this for wind and fire as well, but they are much harder to obtain. Marouche spent the entire map trekking through the forest in an attempt to reach the lower right corner of this map, where reinforcements start showing up on turn 10, and among them are an Entombed, which gives him a full level up. Once he finishes up there, that's the end of the map, as Runan ceases to complete the chapter in 10 turns. Following this map, Runan and Holmes are reunited, and we're going to deal with the gameplay ramifications of this in the next video. After that, we see that there's a boat sailing back into Weld, indicating that the island nation's problems are not quite over yet. But Runan is not going to be the one dealing with them. That's all for this video. I will see you next time.